And Brandy, I've learnt more about agriculture and food security over the last couple of months than I've ever known in my life before. And it's a hugely emotive topic, and obviously food security is something that we all strive for. And I've been talking to Dr. Ismahane Elouafi, who is the Director General of the International Centre for Biosaline Agriculture. They're the people here in Dubai that try to convert marginal land into good farming land, both in terms of improving sort of fertility and providing water as well. This is Dr. Ismahane Elouafi. Food security is of vital importance to the world, especially to poorer areas and those with extreme climate or geography. Now, optimizing land resources in food production is a vitally important pillar of food security. In a simplistic, non-scientific way, is the problem simply that the good weather and the good ground or the good land are in different places?
So if we think about food security in the old days, before globalization time, it used to be a really national problem. It could be even a county problem. Right now, with the globalization and with the international market and the exchange of produce and commodities worldwide, the food security is becoming really a global problem. And hence, it is really not about really only what you can produce in-house and how much you have sufficiency of agricultural products in a country. It's also combined with your accessibility, for example, and also accessibility to those commodities worldwide, and also the stability of the market. So there's a component on the production in-house or in the country, there's a component of accessibility, and there is a component on stability of international markets. The other side of the food security, and that's really what is really very alarming, is that the population is growing very, very, very quickly. The world going to be about 9 billion in 2050, and at that time, really, if you think about the arable land, most of the arable land right now, it's completely used. It's 100% used, and even the production and the productivity, it's maximized. So we came to a maximum production we can get of wheat or maize in normal environment. Then you start thinking about what other potential areas where we can produce. And the other areas that we can produce, it's marginal environments or non-land-based environment. So in marginal environments, and that's where ICBA works, it's really trying to produce agriculture or to increase production of agriculture in areas that has problem of fertility, problem of salinity, problem quality of either the soil, the water, or the weather itself. And also when you think about innovation, it's producing in areas such as greenhouses and urban setting, for example.
Urban settings and multi-story farming, vertical farming as it's called, very expensive solutions, probably too expensive to work in the poorer areas.
Definitely, yes. You're definitely right. It's really normally all those innovative and high-tech production systems are very expensive and they need very high investment at the beginning. We know for a fact that it's not a solution for the poorest of the poor in Africa or Latin America or Asia. It's much more for countries like the Gulf, for example, or countries in Northern Europe. So for those, the poorest of the poorest, what we are trying to do is really find cheap, innovative ideas. For example, small-scale irrigation. Irrigation, it's one of the ways really to increase the production. It's that you are not anymore at the mercy of the weather. You are trying to do supplementary irrigation to have a production. So what we are working with since 2003, it's looking at small-scale irrigation that could make a difference. We had a very good example in Bangladesh where we helped people to have a second crop per year based on irrigation. We are working right now in 7 countries in sub-Saharan Africa looking at small-scale irrigation that doesn't cost much. It's very traditional, it's very simplistic, but it allows people really to produce more than they used to do without irrigation.
Obviously, the existing arable land, as you said, is being used to its maximum, but in creation of extra arable land, there are going to be other problems. You can't demolish cities. If you start knocking down forests, someone somewhere else is going to complain about lack of wood supplies. So how do you do that? Are countries actually creating more arable land? What is actually having to give to do that?
So I think there's always a balance between agriculture and environment. They are very much related, and you have always to keep in mind both your mandate in the agriculture and the environment. So when we talk about, for example, if we look at Africa, one of the biggest problems of Africa, it's the fertility of the soils. So if we have programs to increase productivity of some of the soils, we can bring them to a production. If we come with management practices that help us, for example, reduce the salinity in the Aral Sea in Central Asia, we can bring those areas to production. So there are different innovative methodologies that are based really on adding other components like the compost or like other, it could be chemical as well, fertilizer, to help really the fertility of those soils.
This is what you do, isn't it? At ICBA, you try to turn marginal land into productive land.
Yes, that's what we are trying. And before, in the last 14 years, we were very much focused on salinity issues. But throughout our experience, be it in the MENA region, the Middle East and North Africa, or be it in Central Asia or Africa, we came to an understanding that in many of those marginal environments, the problem is not only salinity. It could be the acidity of the soil. It could be another issue. And that's where we are expanding our mandate from salinity environments to marginal environments.
You work and you do scientific testing in 29 countries. Do you see much synergy between the regions that you test in? Is the research transportable and wider across the region, or is it very much country-specific?
No, I think most of the technologies are transferable. Of course, when you bring them to a new country, a new environment, you have to customize it. But most of the basic research, it's very much transportable, and most of the technology per se, it's very much transportable.
Now, the whole aim of this, of course, is to provide food security. If we have between 9 to 10 billion population in 2050, 80% of the world's population living in urban centres, food security may not be the given fact that it is today. But food security itself is actually relative depending on where you live. I'm sure that people in the US look at food security and expectations differently to people in Central Asia or Africa.
Mm-hmm. That's true. So there are different, actually there's about 200 definitions of food security. But the most popular one is that every single person in the country has access to food. That's what it means. They have access to enough food, and there is a number of calories that they need to have per day. So it's a calorie-based math or equation. The food security in the future, I think, going to be different, as you said, because it's going to be mostly the population going to be urban-based population. So we'll have less farmers in the traditional way or the way we have known it. And that's where I think the future, it's much more with high-tech agriculture. When you talk about Canada, for example, Canada in the prairies, it's 100 of hectares that you can produce. It's large farming system that could still continue, open field continue with low tech. But when you're talking about places that it's very much like Europe, for example, where it's overpopulated and you have urban settings much more than big fields like in the prairies in Canada, then you have to think about others. And that's where in our forum we brought Plantagon, for example. We brought the Gyeonggi from Korea that's really based on vertical farming or based on urban farming in very specific small areas that you can produce. Maybe what you can produce in 1 hectare could be used in 500 square feet.
Land degradation is a very important factor across Africa, the Middle East, Central Asia. Salinization, drought, desertification, they're very big issues, but can these big issues be solved or alleviated or even delayed by humans?
Definitely, because most of the problems we have worldwide, it's climate change. And most of the climate change, it's due to mankind intervention. So I think if we look at it and we do as populations, as people, individuals, as government, and as international organization, if we do actions to mitigate the effect of climate change, not adapt, but mitigate, try to really change it, try to stop it, try to slow it down, we can make a difference, because most of it's really climate change related.
I guess the big word there is if, because that's down to politicians and people on the wider stage. And I mean, let's talk about the relative importance of science, which is what you do, your contribution, versus policy made by politicians in the battle to affect climate change, to supply nutritious food and water to the world's marginal areas.
I think there's a portion of it that's technology, as you said. It's technology-based solution, but the biggest portion is really policy-based solutions. And that policy really, it's from our dealings with the MENA region, for example, and Central Asia, is that most of the policies needs data. So if I wanted the Minister of Water in a country A, for example, to take a decision and stop the depletion of the groundwater or the overuse of water in irrigation, we have to provide them with data. And that's what ICBA is trying really to fill that gap. We are trying to develop databases and information to allow those policy makers to take a decision based on real data, on accurate data, that they know for a fact that their groundwater, for example, it's decreasing by 10% per year, and that if they make meters on irrigation systems, they could bring it back, that 10% that they are losing. So it's much more information that is missing for most of the policymakers. And I believe strongly that if we provide that information, at least we provide them with tools to take the right decision. In the UAE, we have been working with the Ministry of Environment and Water and with Abu Dhabi Environment Agency for the last few years, and really we could see that most of the strategies we are developing with them, or guidelines, are really implemented. So based on the water strategy, for example, that was developed, the Water Master Plan, we could see that the government came to an agreement or came to an understanding that rhodos grass, which is the most used forage in the UAE, is not the right crop for this environment. So based on the water strategy or the Water Master Plan, the government banned the rhodos grass, which is the most used forage in the UAE, because it's very thirsty.
Once a crop is produced and it's harvested, there's still a huge amount of waste before it reaches the table, and I'm sure you've got figures on that, up to half, I think, in many cases. And that's down to poor warehousing conditions, unsuitable transport options, delays, all take their toll. Is there an argument here, in your opinion, for sturdier, genetically modified, genetically enhanced crops? In your view, is it a good idea or a bad idea?
I think that the waste due to post-harvest technologies, due to transportation, due to habits of people in the household, it's a huge problem. It's really a huge problem that needs to be addressed to help use properly the food that we are producing and that we are using so much input to get those products out. So if we think about the GMO, and for example, you are tackling the GMO as a gene to help you conserve better. So have tomato that stays for 2 weeks instead of 3 days, for example. In my mind, GMOs could be a solution, definitely. But you have to use it in the right way. When you are talking about genetically modified organism, you have to have a regulation around it. You have to make sure that by doing so, you are not disrupting the genetic pool around it. There is no crossing with crops or wild crops around the field, for example. And you have also to have proper biosafety measures that are in place. But in my mind, GMO could be a solution for the world, and we have to pursue it and look at it, and we have to be just cautious and have all the policies and regulation to govern it in a proper way.
To make sure the science is good and that you don't create a mutant tomato that takes over the world.
Actually, it wouldn't happen that easy, because we have most of the maize in the world, it's genetically modified. Most of the colza, actually 100% I think of the colza, it's GMOs. It just matters that we don't know about it, and the matter that it has been done in a time that the world didn't pay attention to it. So I think the reality of the things, if we look at the crops right now, many of them are GMOs, mostly maize, colza, soybean as well. So there are different crops that are GMOs. It's just that the debate started about the Bt genes, and in my mind it's a wrong debate, because the benefit we can get from GMOs, it's huge, because what we are doing with GMOs, we are doing genetic improvement in matters of years versus hundreds of years or maybe thousands of years.
What's your view on land grabbing for food security? This is the practice where governments and large organizations buy up tracts of lands in other countries to provide arable and dairy product for themselves in a different country.
So I see, first, for me, land grabbing, it's a negative word. We have to change it. So for me, it's offshore investment. It's like in the old days. I mean, even international petrol company, they have all of them. The British one went all over the world and invest in excavation of petrol. So it's the same thing that's happening in agriculture. And if we go historically, it started in the 90s, about 20 years ago, when West Europe started investing in Eastern Europe for production of their main crops. So I don't see it negatively myself. I see it as, if it's done properly, it could be really the solution, because you got the wealth on different lands, on different parts of the world, and you got land, for example, that should be used and should be used rightly and produce commodities for the world, like in Africa or Latin America, but there isn't the investment that could be made by the government in that part of the world. So I think if you take it as an investment, you got the rich people somewhere that could invest their money to produce something somewhere else. If it's done properly and there is policy and there is sharing of benefit, I think the sharing of benefit is very important. And there is also good methodologies in place to make sure that what we are producing in those environments, it's not harming the environment. So we are not looking only at short-term production, but we are looking at the long-term production.
The one difference between the examples you quoted there is that when a company explores for petroleum, discovers petroleum, the government gets a huge amount of money on a long-term basis. They get a recurring revenue for it. With land, quite often it's a sale from one landlord, if you like, one landowner, or even if it's from the government, it's a one-off price you get for it. You don't necessarily get the recurring benefit as you do with oil exploration. I
think there could be a benefit that is on a monthly basis. So you have to look at the employment that can create. So if, for example, we go and we take 100 hectares in Tanzania, look at how many people they're going to work, be it in the farming system, be it in the marketing, in the transportation, and so on and so forth. So I think there's a huge component that could be, because it's local people that can produce in that land. And I have a very nice example that I heard about the Abu Dhabi environment, or the Abu Dhabi government. They made an investment in Sudan for production of sheep. And what they did, because to produce the sheep, it's very important to have fresh sheep on a daily basis. So what they did, they put in place an airport in Sudan. So the airport, they create the whole airport. They have the whole area farming system around the airport that's producing sheep, and the sheep are slaughtered on a daily basis, and they are shipped on the daily basis for Abu Dhabi. So what happens with that? Sudan got an infrastructure. It's an airport that could be used for anything else. Plus, there was 1,000 of farmers that got a really secure market. So they are producing sheep, and they know that this sheep going to be sold for the Abu Dhabi government for a certain price. So I think it could be a win-win. But to make it sure it's a win-win, it has to be benefit sharing based. So whatever the profit is made, it has to be shared with the people from the population. And I like really that benefit sharing concept to be included. And the only way you can make it included is to make it in the agreement at the principle. So the first investment should be governed by a clear agreement between government or between individuals, and the benefit sharing should be clearly stated there. I think really it's a positive movement towards food security and as well as division of wealth worldwide.
I'm going to ask you now to summarize effectively what you just said in one sentence, because Demba Ba of the Islamic Development Bank said in a recent DuPont roundtable in Washington, you can buy a bottle of Coca-Cola just about anywhere in the world at an affordable price. If it can happen with Coke, why not with nutritious food? I mean, it's very simplistic, but what's the answer?
Actually, I heard similar comparison with the Nestle people as well, that said how difficult it is to produce yogurt or to reduce the price of yogurt, although we know yogurt today, it's a wonderful addition to a kid meal, for example. So I think really the matter here is to really mass production and mass distribution and centralized production and centralized distribution. And I think for the world, what we should pay attention, and that's really, it's a policy issue, it's the control of the price. So we can't let the market of basic food follow the flow of the market. There should be international push to keep it at a low price. And there should be also a better distribution of it. So we know for a fact that there is so many international, multinationals grains that just throw away millions of tons of grain per year because they don't want to put it on the market because the price is going to go low. So this is a really much more a policy issue that we should control the international markets, specifically for the staple food and for the healthy food.
Dr. Ismahane Elouafi, the Director General of the International Centre for Biosaline Agriculture, or ICBA, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Malcolm.